The problem is that a Cooper or a Lopetegui doesn't want to come in and look terrible. So they would ideally like to take over Palace next season.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Ramble Reacts. A lot's been made about Chelsea's inconsistency this season, but if they could play Crystal Palace every week, they'd win the lot. I'm Luke Moore.
And I'm Andy Brassell.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to a Monday night edition of Ramble Reacts. I love doing these, particularly with my old pal Andy. Get to watch a game and then retire to the dining room / recording studio and run the rule over what we've just watched. And ended up at Selhurst Park tonight. Crystal Palace 1, Chelsea 3. Goals came from a beauty actually from Jefferson Lerma, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which opened proceedings. Couple of goals for Conor Gallagher, and then Enzo Fernandez sealed the deal very, very late on. Andy, what did you make of the game? I personally didn't really see why Crystal Palace didn't come out guns blazing from the very start, given what we've seen from Chelsea recently. Haven't won the league until tonight for a month or so. They're a bit disjointed. The manager's under pressure. I thought if you can get after them early, get the crowd behind you, because the crowd at Selhurst Park are always pretty good. It could have been a different story, but they didn't really do that, did they? Despite opening the scoring.
No, and I think if we're going to criticise Palace, or if we're going to
criticise them, man.
I think
use your platform, Brassell. You're a Wimbledon guy.
It's been a long time since we shared there. I'm not as angry anymore.
Yeah.
I think if you look at it, it's very hard to criticise Palace or Roy Hodgson on the back of this, because simply what else could they have done, really? The only thing, going back to your point, the only thing that they could have done really is made it a little bit more solid and defensive in the second half. Yeah. I think really, if you look at that lineup, if you had no knowledge of the situation at Palace, you would think, okay, Roy's going for it, it's a shit or bust lineup. But actually, he didn't have a huge deal of option. He tried to be positive, getting Matheus France in there, mainly because I don't think they have a great deal of creativity without Elise or Eze. So on one hand, you had those little moments from France where you thought, okay, there's a bit of promise here.
I thought he did it right.
But he did. He was terrible without the ball. And he was terrible
going forward, he was good.
With the ball in his own half. Yeah, but I think you look at where Chelsea took the momentum, and Malo Gusto had a great time against him, a really great time against him, and that they were massively under the pump every time he got the ball in his own half, especially in the second half, França. So you can see those little green shoots, but you know, he's an inexperienced player making his first Premier League start, and it showed really. That wasn't really the environment for him. You know, you would have hoped it to be in a slightly better situation with Palace in a slightly better position. So I think you look at the fact that they are a little bit diminished. You know, they've got a couple of their best players out at the moment, and what more could they do? I really don't see what more they could do. The first half went pretty much as they wanted it, and because they were a bit slow to react, and Hodgson was maybe a bit slow to react to the way the match was unfolding in the second half, they kind of lost control of it a little bit, I think. Yeah,
I mean, starting from the very top of the game, I mentioned in the little intro bit there before I asked you your first question, I mean, Palace, yeah, they're fine. They're without Michael Elise because of, I think, a ridiculous gamble that Hodgson made. Obviously, Eze's been massive for them. They're out without him as well. But I don't see why they couldn't have just played with a tempo. I mean, the game started at such a slow pace. It was just ideal for Chelsea because Chelsea are unconfident. They're a little bit, like I said, they're disjointed. They could just knock the ball around. I mean, the first half, Chelsea had about 80% possession with no real intent. I mean, I think Opta were reporting that it's the most possession a team's had since Premier League began in a half with no shots on target. I'm not even sure if they had a shot at all. I think maybe they might have had one, but it certainly wasn't on target.
No, and this is where Chelsea were in August, September. You know, where's the development?
Yeah, it's a really, really weird situation. They just look like a mid-table team, right? And to be fair, I mean, Palace maybe in the first half looked like a mid-table team as well, and then the game kind of got away from them. But Palace started to get a bit of joy midway through the first half with Jean-Philippe Mateta, just because he's so positive and he's a driving runner with the ball at his feet, and he can give defenders something to think about, particularly defenders who've, Chelsea haven't had a brilliant time of it on and off the pitch defensively, particularly with when you incorporate Thiago Silva's wife into the proceedings, and Pochettino's have to answer questions about that. I mean, he was very touchy in a press conference when being asked about why he dropped Silva for the cup game and why he's brought him back again, and I just think that Mateta got some joy because he was so positive, and we always see the effectiveness of just purely positive forward players in the Premier League. In my view, they don't even need to have that much quality, but they can give defenders something to think about. And in fact, the Jefferson Lerma goal, which was an absolute screamer, was a beauty, but it came originally from Mateta being really positive and then Chelsea being sloppy trying to deal with it. So tentative, couldn't deal with the second ball, then didn't deal with the third ball. And Lerma just lashed it into the top corner. I particularly enjoyed at half-time in the Monday Night Football coverage, Petr Čech just saying he definitely would have saved it because what he would have done is this and he would have done that. And I was thinking, okay, it's pretty easy from the studio when you're like 45 years old.
But on the other hand, is different to 99% of those other situations where it's a pundit, normally an outfield player who has very little understanding of goalkeeping, saying, what I would have done.
It's a treat. It is a treat to have him.
What I would have done is watch the goalkeeper let it in and then blamed it on him. Basically, is what it is. I mean, the fact that Dave Jones, I thought, took really good advantage of the fact that while Petr Čech was describing it, he was subconsciously, without even realising he was doing it, taking the stance, and so he's like, go backwards, keep going backwards, keep going backwards.
He was like a theatre director.
Yes, but I'm really glad you addressed the elephant in the room there, which, yes, fantastic goal. Chelsea should never be conceding a goal like that.
Oh, no.
It was just absolutely shambolic defending. And you know what? I think Pochettino did well to not drag Madueke off on the spot. And,
you think you'd have been
maybe even Caicedo.
You'd have been that harsh on him, would you?
It's just really, you can't say unforgivable. There are not many things on a football pitch that are unforgivable, apart from, I don't know, poking someone's eye out with a corner flag.
Depends who it is.
People use that a little bit too much, but in the context of the match, he should never be doing that. You see, he had a few situations like that. We talked about França before, where he's like taking the ball out when it's been cleared from a corner, and he's running the ball out, and he's doing it with, I wonder what I'm going to do with it next. And while he's thinking that, Malo Gusto's taking it off him. But Madueke or Caicedo shouldn't be doing that. And Caicedo lying on the floor pretending he's been fouled. I mean, come on.
As ever with the midfield situation, with 90% of the teams Chelsea play, on paper it's a mismatch. It's like a total mismatch. I mean, you've got such quality. I know they haven't. I mean, particularly Caicedo, because he's been a bit stop-start because of the recent injuries. But
yes,
base of midfield for them. I mean, I think Enzo Fernandez is a fantastic player. I mean, it's easy to forget he's an inexperienced player still, because his rise has been so astronomical
in European terms. Definitely,
yeah, for sure. And so. And really, Europe is the crucible of top level football. I mean, so it is a factor that he hasn't played that much European football. But you've got a situation there where it looks like a mismatch in the middle of the park, and that area which leads to Palace scoring is exactly the area they should be dominant. I mean, there's no question about that. But I'll deviate slightly from you by saying that is fair. The ball should have been dealt with not once but twice. But it's still a great goal from Lerma from that kind of distance. He's absolutely lashed it into the far corner, and that can happen. I mean, it's not. Of course, on one level, it's defensively poor, out of possession, and indeed in possession for Chelsea. But at the same time, the reason I kind of chuckle at Petr Čech saying what he said is because, fine, technically it's interesting punditry, but also Petr Čech, respectfully, is 10 times the goalkeeper David Petrovic is, and so it's a little bit harsh given the quality of the strike and given the relative inexperience of the goalkeeper as well, I thought. So
is what you're saying, when Mauricio Pochettino eventually gets fired and Petr Čech...
by the end of this show. No, actually, it won't be now. It won't be now.
Probably. And Petr Čech hangs up his ice hockey stick to come in as like... As interim between now and the end of the season. He's going to be goalkeeping Glenn Hoddle.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what else.
Would it and just say, come on, man, why can't you do this? Why can't you do this? You're just not trying.
What other stuff can Petr Čech do with his hands in his retirement? Because he plays hockey, he also plays the drums. It must be other things he can do, but don't take your mind to the gutter, Andy. I'm talking about other legitimate things he could do. I thought he was a good pundit. I enjoyed his contributions.
Build Lego.
Yeah, bit of Lego. Could do a Lego Masters. Good show on the E4. That Lego Masters.
It's very popular amongst footballers and former footballers. Less so than is actually said in public spaces. I think Lego is
I don't think you should be ashamed of it. I think it's my dad loves Lego. My wife loves Lego. It's great. It's a great hobby.
I don't think you should be ashamed of it. I also don't think you should be in a group called adult Lego enjoyers.
Are you in that?
I think that sounds a bit creepy. I couldn't possibly reel that. Like I said, no one talks about it in public.
It's either that or it's a dig at Pete Donaldson, who's not here to defend himself. So that's very unfortunate. Listen, we'll go to the end of the first half. I mean, Chelsea had loads of the ball, didn't really do much with it. Their XG, as I mentioned or I alluded to, their XG at half-time was 0.00. It's not great. But I think the way that Crystal Palace started the second half was really disappointing. And before that, Michael Oliver being slow to come out for the second half because he had some kind of communication issue with his mic, and the players were just resorted to just knocking the ball about, waiting for the second half to start. I think Gary Neville kind of lost his mind a bit. Like, I don't know if you listened to the commentary, but Gary Neville started inquiring whether the communication between officials was actually important and can we just get on with the game. And I would say, well, given that the whole edifice of modern refereeing is geared around referees talking not just to VAR but to the fourth official, to the linesman, I'd say yes, it probably is quite important, Gary.
Also, what he's failed to know is it's really important to his job, because as we know, the favourite part of Gary Neville's job, his favourite part of his job, is spoiling the surprise for us while we're waiting for VAR to make a decision.
Yeah, he loves it.
He likes to get there 2.5 seconds beforehand, doesn't he?
He likes to get the news out before anyone else can. He needs to be first.
But the whole Michael Oliver thing, I guess it's one of those things where the whole modern experience of going to a football match is deeply unsatisfactory when something goes even slightly wrong. Anything technology related, isn't it?
It feels
because
basic.
The crowd clearly didn't know what was going on there, and you're probably sitting there thinking, "This never would have happened to Usher at half time yesterday, would it?"
Are you thinking there should be some kind of like commentator / narrator announcer at every stadium?
Yeah, I think that would be
it's the monster trucks or something.
I think that would be quite an interesting idea. You know how there's a bit of light description at NBA, for example.
Yeah,
I think, or actually British basketball as well. I think that would be quite handy. I mean, obviously, it would be nice if there was no technology, players didn't moan about decisions, and we all just got on with it. But I think we're past that point.
Yeah,
now
let's be realistic. Can I make a slightly more rogue shout and say that I know they're very different in terms of sporting endeavours, but when you go to the snooker, you can buy an earpiece and you get commentary in your ear while you're watching it.
Oh, and you can do the cricket as well. You can get TV commentary in your ear. You know, I knew you were dying to say something about snooker ever since you talked about the crucible of European football. I just had this image of Enzo Fernandez in like white gloves, like polishing a cue ball.
In another world, I am a broadcaster about indoor games / sports, darts, snooker. That's my real love. Like that,
right.
Honestly, those types of sports, and they are sports, are my real love, to be honest. But I think it might be a little bit noisy at a football match to have the old commentary in your ear. Because back in the day, Andy, you remember as well as I do, you used to get old fellas standing behind you on the terraces with the old transistor radio to their ear, didn't you? Yeah,
you did actually. A friend of mine who I used to work with, the Aguero moment in the Premier League, where of course United were playing at Sunderland that day, and they'd done that bit and they'd won while time was ticking away at the Etihad. A friend of mine, he followed United home and away, and he was listening on his radio, and it seems weird and anachronistic because it's actually not that far in the past, is it? Yeah. But he was listening in, because people had very basic smartphones at the time, to what was happening on 5 Live or whatever. And of course, the people around him in the seats were listening to what happened. And before he knew it, because there weren't that many people with transistor radios on the terrace, they were in the away end at Sunderland, and there was like best part of 100 people around him, maybe more, all crowding in and listening, and obviously like all collectively wincing when the news came through of Aguero's goal.
You say it's not that long ago, but the idea of Man United being in the title race on the final day makes it seem like a very long time ago. But anyway, back to the game. So when the second half did finally get underway, Chelsea started it perfectly. Conor Gallagher scored a minute in. It was a lovely finish. I mean, actually, special bit of praise for Nicholas Jackson, actually, because he's been partly derided for not being Christopher Nkunku and partly derided for not quite being ready for top level football yet from what I've seen, but it was a fantastic near post run, like textbook near post run to drag the defenders away and leave the space for Gallagher, who clearly had the time and quality to make the finish. They hit the ground running in the second half after being so poor in the first half, but obviously Gallagher scored another one later in the game as well. Quick word on him, because he, to me, and I know this seems like it's a bit of bad timing me saying this now, but I think I am going to stick to my guns and just make it as a general point, is that for me, Gallagher doesn't seem like a 10. He doesn't seem like he contributes enough in terms of goals and assists and pure creativity to play as a 10 in that system they want to play. And I get that he's good in the press. I get that he gets around the pitch. I get that he's high energy and can pick a pass out. But to me, he's a better player deeper, and maybe there's just not room for him at club level or international level at this point, playing deeper. Yeah. So at the moment, he's doing a job there. What did you make of his performance tonight, and what do you make of his kind of overall season and potentially what's ahead of him?
Well, it's good even in the first half. I mean, the only time they had a sniff of goal, it was Conor Gallagher on the end of it, wasn't it? The end of the first half. So, look, I think he can certainly do a job where he is at the moment. I would agree with you, and I think given that he is quite a natural at making runs into the box, you want a deeper starting position anyway. So I think that makes better sense. You know, you look at him and you think, yeah, probably not quite the technique for that number 10 sort of role. England squad, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't feel to me that... It feels that Chelsea have used him a lot out of necessity this season. I think if everything was going perfectly at Chelsea, he wouldn't be playing quite as much. I understand he's very important. He's very dear to everyone there. Obviously, it would be a massive difference maker for Crystal Palace, but it feels to me that he's important to Chelsea because there is so much instability elsewhere, really. And obviously, the powers that be at the club haven't seen that and are trying to sell him anyway.
That's another weird situation, because clearly Pochettino likes him, and he looks like... I mean, it's not a huge surprise that that's how Chelsea appear to be doing business, although to be fair to them, they didn't actually do the business in January with Gallagher going out. But to incorporate that point into the conversation is that, you know, Spurs are the team that wanted him, and Spurs are the team very close to signing him. There's no way he plays in that position ahead of Maddison. As a 10, he looks like he'd be someone who can go into the mix and be one of the two behind Maddison if Bentancur, who's had injury problems, or Sarr or Basuma or whoever's not available. He goes into the mix for one of those positions, in my view, at Spurs. He doesn't play ahead of Maddison, and he doesn't play ahead of other attacking players when Maddison's unavailable either. So to me, it feels like that's where the future of his position is. It was quite interesting to see him celebrate quite so vociferously against a club where he obviously has a lot of affection for and has done very well at. But maybe he just feels like... It seemed to me like the celebration of a player who feels like he's under pressure to add more numbers to his game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, or maybe he's just behaving how footballers should behave and just celebrate the goal. I mean, you know, that's nice, I think. Yeah, it was good to see him not do the hands up or any of that sort of nonsense.
And the final cherry on top from Enzo... where he just basically had all day to just pick his spot after the defender went down so easily. I think it was Anderson went down so easily and just picked his spot and fine. That the game was done.
Yeah, it was. But with both those last two goals that came right at the end of the game, I don't know if it was just an excellent bit of TV directing, but the focus on the body language of the Palace players I thought was really interesting. How defeated they looked and how... like all over the place, they really looked after that. And I think that was an interesting thing. You know, we talked about how Chelsea struggled to create proper chances, and or struggle to really take chances as well, despite all their mastery of the ball, and particularly that was the case in the first half. Now, on one hand, I think they created quite a decent amount of chances in the second half against a team that's habitually as defensive as Palace, especially when Cole Palmer, despite creating those 2 goals at the end, you take those away and he wasn't really at it. He wasn't
didn't have a great game.
He wasn't at his best, certainly, and obviously his best is very, very good. I thought, really, a team that was a bit more clinical, that maybe that could have been quite ugly, that second half, because, as I said, as a collective, and France was only part of that. I think there's far too much responsibility on Adam Wharton, who's just a teenager who's arrived from the Championship, again, affected by the situation that they're in and the personnel that they've got. I think a better team than Chelsea could have absolutely taken them to pieces in the second half, a more coherent team than Chelsea. So I think there are 2 ways of looking at it. One, that Chelsea found a way of creating stuff in a slightly different way, which I think is a definite positive for them. But on the other hand, if you're talking about a really top team, honestly, I fear to think what a Liverpool or City or Arsenal would have done to Palace in that second half, and they just look so dishevelled by the end of it. Now, I don't know if that's something you can particularly pin on Hodgson. Maybe you have a view on that, but I think it's certainly an indication of the situation they're in and how those players feel about it, and they're really in a hole.
Yeah. I mean, to be absolutely fair to Palmer, before I come on to the other point, I mean, he did get 2 assists tonight, so I mean, if that's a quiet night at the office, then that's not too bad for him at the age he is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He's just been so impressive that I guess we're used to seeing him really tear it up. On the Palace side of the ledger, I find it an interesting situation because we've got a few clubs knocking about where instability or indecisiveness off the pitch appears to be informing what's happening on the pitch. You put West Ham in that based on what happened at the weekend. You could arguably even put Chelsea in that, and there are 1 or 2 other clubs as well. Crystal Palace are definitely suffering from that, and the thing I find very interesting about it is that it's got a very holding pattern type feel, and when you go up against a good team, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, that's the 14th game in a row Chelsea have beaten Palace home and away in, right, in all competitions. I mean, their record against Chelsea is appalling anyway. But I don't know how much you can read into that if you go back far enough. It's probably not even that relevant. But the point being that Chelsea have consistently really been a heavyweight team in the Premier League, and Palace have found it impossible to get any kind of change out of them whatsoever. There may be different reasons for that, but for me, based on tonight, it feels a bit like everyone knows that the jig is up with Hodgson, right? It just depends on when the jig's going to be up. It could be up on Wednesday. It could be up at the end of the season. Where it gets really interesting is it's informing their performances, and it's making the crowd, who are normally a really big asset to Crystal Palace, the home crowd, upset and protesting and all the rest of it. But then you throw into the mix, which makes it a really heady brew, I think, the sheer amount of decent quality managerial candidates out there that Crystal Palace could just go and get. They could have done it at the start of January.
Well, could they? That's the question. Because
let's put it out there. Let me just finish the point. Let's put it out there, because if they had gone and been decisive, and I'm talking about decisiveness here, if they had gone decisively at the start of January, they could have gone Steve Cooper.
Yeah.
Right? He went fairly around that kind of time. I don't remember exactly what was off the top of my head. I think they could have gone Kieran McKenna, who is a really, really highly rated young manager, and I'd bloody love them to go after Russell Martin for all the obvious reasons. And that's just in terms of UK managers. There's talk of Lopetegui was in the wings, looking like he was interested in coming back to England. There was 1 or 2 others as well. I mean, why are they not trying to move quickly when they've got the pick? Because they're a Premier League side and they're not terribly financed. They've not got a problem with profit and sustainability rules at the moment. They've been run pretty well from what I can see. Why are they not moving quickly and decisively to get a candidate where they can interview 3 or 4 of them and have their pick of the bunch?
But I think the problem is that you're talking about what they should have done in January. The fact is it's not January anymore. And it's clear from the noises coming out of Palace that they would be happy to get rid of Hodgson and take on someone else, but no one wants to go into that situation with not that much of the season.
So you think Palace have tried, but they've not been able to convince people?
Yes, of course. They've definitely spoken to other coaches, and even if Hodgson was going really well and Palace were going quite well, with him out of contract at the end of the season and at the age he is, or going better than they currently are, that they would be negligent to not look at other managers at this point. The problem is that a Cooper or a Lopetegui doesn't want to come in and look terrible. So they would ideally like to take over Palace next season. If they're still in the Premier League, it's an incredibly attractive job. And I think they will still be in the Premier League. It's a very, very attractive job. You look at the fact that they'll probably end up with a new investor because Textor will sell his shares. They are going to be redeveloping Selhurst Park, which has been an idea that's been lurking for a long time, and those fans are magnificent, but the actual stadium isn't. So that's something that they need to do and get on with as well. The club needs to progress on and off the pitch. But I think the problem is they have to deal with the situation they're in at the moment. You're right. They do need to move on from Hodgson because everyone knows that he's just treading water at this time and that he is going to go. What they really need to do is adjust to the reality, to realise that they're not going to get Lopetegui, that they're not going to get Cooper now. So they've got to find a good, solid interim that sees them through. And look, I don't know if that's Sean Derry or anyone else, but they've got to deal with the situation, because just because they can't get the person they want to replace Hodgson in the medium term now, that's no real excuse for inaction. They have to do something, because if they stay up on current form, it will only be because the teams below them are so shit. Yeah. It won't be because of anything they've done.
And speaking of that, Andy,
they can't leave it to chance.
Speaking of that, mate, next Monday night, Goodison Park, Crystal Palace go to. Massive. It's massive. Yeah.
It's huge.
And good to see you linking yourself with the job there. Shout out for Sean Derry. You're busy enough as it is, mate. I'm not sure you could squeeze in a full-time management job as well.
Well, it depends if I'm on the podcast next Monday. I mean,
yeah, right. It just want to parachute you in for a couple of games.
I think that would be a sexy new addition to Ramble Reacts, me doing it from the touchline at Goodison, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I wouldn't put... Some people, not me, some people would say putting you and sexy in the same sentence is a stretch. I'm not one of those people. I find you incredibly sexy, as you know.
Sean Derry is very offended.
I've actually got Sean Derry's number. I could drop him a text, see if he's see if he's going to take the job or not. See if there's any.
What's your text to him going to be? You're not sexy.
No. First of all, going to be. Do you remember in the summer of 2015 when I arranged for you to do a thing for us that you didn't want to do? I've still got your number. Would you like to give me some really important information about your career, even though you can't remember who I am? Anyway, listen, we got through a Ramble Reacts there, a show about Chelsea without me slagging them off unnecessarily once. So you're welcome, Chelsea fans. I expect a fully balanced overview and review of this episode on Twitter.
Good luck with that.
Because every time I call them a shower of absolute pricks, I get a load of stick on Twitter. So I haven't done that today on purpose. I've given them their credit, given them their due. It's an important win for them, Andy. Before we wrap up entirely, what does it mean for Chelsea? We talked about what it means for Palace and what it might mean for Roy the Boy. What does it mean for Chelsea? They move into the top half now. They're 10th as we record this episode. What can they realistically hope for? How does this move the dial for them?
I think the points totals of those directly above them give them a little bit of encouragement, because I would say at this point in time, bearing in mind what I would have expected at the start of the season, I would say that Palace are about par, maybe slightly below, and Chelsea are about par, because I didn't expect them to qualify for Europe at the start of the season. I think, to be fair to Pochettino, it was always a reconstruction job that was going to take a load of time, that was going to have a load of setbacks. Now, talking about that and preparing yourself for that, and then Chelsea actually living that after the success of the last, well, not even the last 20 years. You can go back to, this is a crap season if we're talking about pre-Abramovich, if we're talking about, when they had the funding of Matthew Harding, they were far more successful than they are in this present season. I guess if they were to get into Europe And you look at where they are in the Cups, and you look at the fact that the teams that are in front of them have only got a couple of points more than them. I think it's a good season, and I think there has to be some sort of acknowledgement of that. Having said that, I think if we're talking about them getting to Europe through the league, like the teams just in front of them, and I'm thinking particularly of Newcastle, are demonstrably better and have got a better plan and have got more direction. And I would, if I was wanting to coach a team, or if I was a fan of one of those teams, I'd be far happier with, say, Newcastle than I would be with the situation at Chelsea. But look, there's still opportunity. It's not a total write-off the season. There've been loads of setbacks, but there are always going to be loads of setbacks. It's just hard to put those setbacks into perspective when you're talking about Chelsea. And it's like when we talk about Manchester United and their rebuild and their hope to get somewhere in a better place. Every time that there's a setback for Manchester United, it feels like the earth has fallen from under their feet, where actually it's just part of the journey, isn't it?
And I guess Chelsea are also in a League Cup final, right? And that'll be...
Exactly.
I mean, if we're not going to count the 2 trophies that Pochettino won at PSG, and I don't think we should actually, for the purposes of this point I'm about to make, Pochettino hasn't really won anything as a manager. He's obviously League Cup runner-up in 2015 with Spurs, and obviously a Champions League runners-up in 2019 with Spurs. But that's it. So, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? I think it's not necessarily about what Pochettino does with Chelsea now. It's about the way they've embarked upon this project is absolutely a project, right? Under a new ownership and a new regime and a new direction. And do they think Pochettino's the guy to take them forward, given that I think, as a coach, he's got quite an exalted position that I'm not sure he deserves.
I would totally agree with that. And I think it's quite difficult to frame exactly who or what he is as a coach. I think when you look at the way it ended at Spurs, when you look at the fact that he left it way too long to take a job after Spurs and then took a job that was patently unsuitable for him and that he was unsuitable for, I think in some ways we still think of him as a young coach, and yet he's in his 50s and he earns the sort of salary, and he did at PSG and he has at Chelsea as well. He earns a sort of salary that is commensurate with someone with a lot more trophies and a lot more experience, really. So it is hard to kind of put a label on him. I mean, if you think one of the jobs that he was linked with going back to before and after PSG was Dortmund, and Dortmund could never afford him. Now, if you can't take the Dortmund job, the thing is, he's not quite good enough to get an elite club, but it's kind of an elite salary, isn't it?
Yeah. I totally get that. It's almost like I always remember when Rivaldo left. I think it was Barcelona, and like his agent was putting leaking out wage demands, which basically ruled him out of every single club in the world. It's like, what's the point? You might as well just adjust and live in the world as it is, rather than the world you want it to be. But it could always be worse for Pochettino. I did notice that Joey Barton's very public meltdown, which has netted him a grand total of 4.3 thousand YouTube subscribers, having set fire to him and everything that's dear to him in pursuit of it. In the background of the live streaming he does now, pride of place on the shelf, he's got a League 2 Manager of the Month award. So, speaking of managers who haven't done much, it could always be worse. I hope Pochettino doesn't quite sink to those depths. But that is it. That is it for Ramble Reacts tonight. A very, very warm and appreciative thank you to my friend and colleague and confidant and occasional lover, Andy Brassell, for joining me tonight. Join us on Wednesday for the Ramble. Andy and I will be back with Marcus and Jim for the reaction to Man City's trip to Copenhagen, along with plenty more, including how the lawmakers of football intend to deal with goalkeepers that are given a blue card. And trust me on that, it is bonkers. Bonkers. It's basically now the point where lawmakers in the game are just making stuff up to give it jeopardy that it doesn't really need. So we'll cover that and many other things as well. So don't miss our takes on Wednesday. In the meantime, find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, TikTok, Instagram and YouTube at Football Ramble. And follow us on Spotify as well. Go in there, hit the follow button. It means a great deal to us, and it's an easy thing for you to do. We'd really appreciate it. Hit the follow button on Spotify, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers for watching another fantastic clip from the Football Ramble podcast. Make sure you click like on this video and subscribe to the channel, which means you will not miss a single upload.